Welcome, everybody, to another episode of My Big Fat Junk Drawer. Today, I am joined by Jessica, who is a life and career coach, an author, a podcaster, and a corporate coach. So welcome, Jessica. This is the big time for me.
Hi, Amanda. What do you mean by that? It's the big time
You
for
are
you.
probably my most famous person because you actually have a bio a mile long.
Well, I've done a lot of things.
You have.
The metaphorical junk drawer.
That's
of my life
right.
is
Exactly.
very full.
Then you've come to the right place. So with that, I will jump right into it. Jessica, what did you bring from your junk drawer today?
I brought an Uno card.
Nice.
It is a yellow number 1 from an Uno deck. And I'm actually not even sure if all of the cards, like if every number 1 in an Uno deck is yellow or if they're blue or green or whatever, because I found this one on the ground when I was taking a walk. But that is what I brought today.
Nice. And could you tell a little bit about why that Uno card is special for you and what made you keep it?
Yeah. Why is it special to me? It was a sign. That is why it is special and why I've kept it now for, I think it's been about 4 years. So 4 years ago, I was nominally employed in the middle of a divorce, freeloading at my brother's house. And I was just lost. I'd been, for several years before that, before the divorce, I'd been working with my ex-husband in a business that we owned together. So the marriage ended, so did that employment situation. And I moved to Phoenix to stay in my brother's guest room. And I was just kind of trying to figure out what I was doing. And I was, like I said, lost. And I kept asking the universe for signs. I was like, send me a sign that I'm on the right path. And I don't, do you get signs ever? Like, do you believe in signs?
I do, actually. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's very interesting that you say that.
Do you have one that?
I get them not so much like, well, I have dreams. I'll say that. It's a little wacky and sounds silly, but I do sometimes have dreams that are like, oh, this is your answer to this problem. So yeah, but I get what you're saying. I totally get
Yeah. Well, what you say about dreams, I do some dream analysis with my clients.
Ooh.
I hear like, oh, they're a little wacky. I'm like, yes, there's something in it. But yeah, I ask because at some point in 2020, 2021, I started seeing the number 111, 111 over and over. And I'd never really been into numerology.
Mhm.
That I like astrology, I like tarot, I like all those things. But I'd never really been serious about, oh, I keep seeing 555 or make a wish, it's 1111.
Mhm.
That I was like, well, that happens twice a day.
Yeah.
But at some point, 111 just kept popping up. And so I Googled it. I was like, all right, what the hell does this mean? And what I found was that the number 111 means you are on the right track, on the right path. And for someone who had no idea where I was going, that reassurance, not that I was, about to find my perfect career or that I was like about to come into a lot of money, but simply that I was going in the right direction, that was a relief. I mean, just such a relief. So I was taking a walk one morning and I looked down and there's this yellow Uno card. And I was like, all right, trash, whatever. But then I realized, oh my God, it's got a 1 in the lower left corner, a 1 in the middle, and a 1 in the upper right corner. There was my 111. And I just knew it. I was like, oh, that's a sign. That's a sign.
Yeah, that is.
So I picked it up and I took it home, a piece of trash, and I've had it ever since.
That's pretty amazing. That really speaks to me. That's like, I totally get it. Sometimes, and especially around like 2020, when everything was going to basically hell in a handbasket, we get to a point where And I've found this to be true in my life in many different chapters of it because I've gone through a lot of stuff. I personally have gone through times where I'm just stuck and don't know where to go, don't know how to move in a different direction, or am I moving in a direction that I want to go? I actually started this podcast on my 50th birthday at a point where we had a death in our family. My cousin, who we were very close in age, passed away, and it really kind of stuck with me. It was very difficult because I was coming to the realization like, oh crap, I've got more life possibly behind me than in front. So I just was starting to look for signs of like what I should do. I should be doing more. I should be doing something different. What does that look like? So I always ask for signs or like, well, what should I do? But in the back of my mind, and honestly, ever since I was little, I was fascinated by radio. I was fascinated by stories and all this stuff. And for about a year, I started reading about podcasts. I listened to podcasts and I just like, oh, well, that seems like fun. So I started doing it and I'm like, what the hell? I'm going to do it. So that's kind of where I am now. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love your story.
Thank you. I love what you said about, being a child and being very into radio and talk shows and things like that, because so often when we're lost, especially in career or in like life purpose kind of stuff,
Hmm.
the advice is always, well, go back to when you were a kid. What did you really enjoy doing when you were a kid? And for me, that never really stuck. Like it never was very helpful because I was like, look, man, I liked to read books. No one's really paying me to read
Hmm.
anymore. I've had a long career in communications, language, marketing. That's been the kind of cornerstone that I built my varied career on. But the reading itself, like no one is paying me to sit in a room and read,
I wish,
right?
right?
But another thing that I did, I was like, well, okay, I also liked to read books out loud in my bedroom to an audience of no one. Again, no one was going to pay me for that. I had no interest in being like a voice actor or anything like that.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh, wait, what else did I like to do? And I loved QVC and the Home Shopping Network when I was growing up. I still do. I'll still turn it on and watch it. I just love to be sold. I'm like, tell me why I need this ab machine. Tell me why I
Yes.
need this blender. I love it. Just we'll watch it for hours. So when I was a kid, I would go and gather up all the jewelry in the house and I would play QVC in front of my mirror.
Oh, that's
And I'd
awesome.
sit there and I would just sell a piece of fake, like plastic jewelry to an imaginary audience. And so I'd reflect on these things I like to do. And I'm like, okay, this advice is crap. This is not helping me at all. Until I realized recently that, part of what I do, I believe that what I'm doing is actually selling the belief and the hope that we can be free from the burden of doubt. That is truly, I call myself a leap of faith coach, but fundamentally, it's shifting a perspective from a very doubtful existence, which is where I lived for a very long time, to one that's more filled with faith and trust and hope. And I was like, okay, that's kind of what I'm doing when I coach people one on one, when I record, programs or whatever for my audience. I'm kind of sitting in my bedroom selling plastic jewelry to an imaginary audience. It feels the same to me. It feels the same like experience of joy and excitement. But I could never have put those two things together,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Just by, saying, well, what I liked to do when I was a kid was sell plastic jewelry in my bedroom.
That's a great connection, though. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I used to love to play teacher and speech writer and all stuff. And what did I end up doing? Writing, editing. That's been my work for my whole career. So
Isn't that
it's
amazing?
funny. And that also goes with things that I've learned with acting and improv, especially studying improv for so long. That inner child never goes away. Like that person is who you are in your core, and you just kind of have to tap into it.
Okay, what's your best advice for tapping into it?
You have to, and it kind of goes with taking a leap of faith. You cannot censor yourself. Whatever is sitting there, you let it out. Whatever words come out, is the right one. Like, you can't be encumbered by this, oh, this is right, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing this. That's the adult censoring part of you coming out. So it's very much a leap of faith in improv. It's very much trusting that I like improv better than stand up, because in improv I feel supported because there are other people there to kind of pick you up. But that's kind of what improv is really believing in yourself to just say what you want to say and be free to do that without being worried about being right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing you say that because it's such a microcosm of life. Like, especially when you talk about needing to take that leap and then finding that you're caught on the other side, like if it's maybe with your troupe or whoever you're performing with,
Hmm.
that they're going to bounce off you in some way and create something new out of what you're saying. A lot of people, when they start the work with me, they're like, well, how do I do it? Right?
Hmm.
What do I need to do? What are the mechanics of doing this? And I'm like, listen, the faith comes after you do it. The belief that it is possible comes after you do it. Unfortunately, it doesn't come before.
Hmm.
Like believing that you can get up on stage and do some improv, which I have never done, and it feels terrifying to me. But I imagine that the belief that people will catch you and that you'll be able to respond doesn't really come to you until after you've done it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, okay,
Hmm.
that did work out. I
Yeah.
was able to respond, I was able to improvise.
Yeah. And a lot of people in the same way don't believe that they can do it. And they're very afraid to do it. But yeah, it's that jumping off and just going all in. I know in my life and career choices and things that I've done, that leap of faith, it seemed to come easier for me when I was younger because I didn't have as much fear. But now that I'm older and in certain parts of my life, it feels like there's that thing in me that's like, oh, do you really want to do that? What's the cost of doing that? That might not be a great idea. We need to hold off on this. But I'm trying to fight it and figure out, just do this and like podcasting, just do it and see what happens. So, but I'm very much at a point where I'm fighting myself again. I feel it and I don't like it.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question about
Okay.
your astrology. Do you know your astrology?
I am an Aries.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
I don't know. That's like the baseline of what I know
Yeah,
of astrology. Like,
okay.
I'll read a horoscope every day if I could. But yeah,
Okay. So when you said that you were more apt to take a leap of faith when you were younger,
mm-hmm,
it's the first thing I thought was because I've had the opposite experience.
mm,
I am a Capricorn, so we're like the old man of the zodiac,
mm-hmm.
and Aries is actually the baby. So the astrological calendar starts with Aries.
Yep.
So like you're the baby of the zodiac and I'm the old man. And one of the things that's said about Capricorns is that we age backward. So when I was in my early 20s, the idea of taking a risk of any kind, of even a calculated, not even a risk, but anything that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed 100%, I wouldn't do it, would not do it, just terrified of everything. I was like, well, this decision will obviously ruin my life. That was kind of the refrain
Yeah.
of everything. I'm going to ruin my life if I do this. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten more willing to do things that are less certain. And so anytime I hear something, I was like, oh, I wonder. So if you start your life as an Aries, like in kind of baby and growing,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I can totally feel that too, because my thinking back then was of the opinion, you know what? I'm young. If I mess it up, I'll just fix it later. Like, that was how I thought of it. So it's
Okay.
basically the opposite of
The total opposite. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to ruin everything forever.
Oh, I didn't think of that at all. And I ruined some things. So.
That's so funny. Well, and now, I know, of course, as we get older, you create more infrastructure
Mm,
around
mhm.
yourself,
Yeah.
right? You've got like, you have actual assets now, and you have a house, and like maybe you've got family members that rely on you financially to whatever degree. So it makes sense that you're now weighing more factors than you were back then.
Mhm.
And that, of course, can make any decision feel a little trickier.
Yeah. How do you speak to clients who think that way, who are like, well, if I take this risk, it could be devastating for me? How do you move past that? How do you suggest to your clients to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there are two sides, right? There's the practical, like, hey, if I gave you $1 million, would these fears go away? And if
Hmm.
the answer is yes, then we're just working on some of the practical things. Like, how much money do you need to feel comfortable with this risk? What factors do need to be in place so you can actually not go into a complete state of like fight or flight, freeze, that kind of thing?
Hmm.
You have to be practical about those things and knowing your own tolerance. So we spend some time there. But if the answer is like $1 million would still not make you feel safe, and for a lot of people, that number just keeps going up,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Like you think six figures will make you feel safe. And then you hit six figures and you're like, oh, well, I still don't feel safe. And like you keep ratcheting that number up and it's never enough. And that means that there's some other work that needs to be done around what it means to feel safe, where your safety comes from, who is in charge of your safety, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then the last piece is giving as much airtime to positive what ifs as negative what ifs. So when you ask the question, like, well, hey, what if this doesn't work out? Of course, you can kind of play that out a little bit, but you also have to play out the positive. You also have to give airtime
Yeah.
to what you want to have happen and not only the negative. And that was a lesson I learned the hard way because there was never a positive pull toward anything in my life. It was exclusively, if I do this, I'll lose all my money and ruin my life forever.
Yeah. I know. I get stuck in that headspace of all negative. Failure, financial, all of it all skews negative now. And in the past, obviously it didn't as much, but it's finding that positive aspect and believing in that part of it is difficult for me, at least.
Yeah, I think especially when it feels like those positive things are outside of your control.
Hmm.
Like, well, yeah, of course that could happen. The positive things could happen, but I don't control that. And so I think a lot of the work is bringing it home and saying, do I believe in myself to figure out whatever happens next? Whatever happens next, can I figure out a way to solve for that solution, to solve for that problem? And that has been the one of the biggest changes for me is focusing less on whether something went right and more on my ability to course correct if and when things go wrong. You said something earlier that, oh, about right or wrong decisions. Like,
Hmm.
am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Did I do that right? I finally realized that I needed to spend some time thinking about the runway of a right or wrong decision. At what point do you decide that the decision was right or wrong? Is that like in 6 months if I haven't made my money back? Is it in a year? Is it in 6 years? Is it in 20? Like, at what point do you sit back and evaluate and say, well, you know what? I left my job to start that business, and 6 months later, I was broke. So that was a wrong decision. But in the course of that, maybe you met the love of your life.
Mm.
Was it a right decision? Was it a wrong decision? How do you tell?
Yeah, and a lot of that is imposing those ideas from other people, like family input, what society deems as right or wrong. And you get all of this noise that you have to filter out to do all that. So that's part of it too, is just filtering out all the noise.
I say exactly that.
Hmm.
I say tune out the noise,
Yeah.
but exact same thing. I was at an airport in Phoenix in May, and this woman was asking me about what I do. And she said, well, what advice would you have for someone starting a business? If you could tell them one thing. I said, tune out the noise.
Mm.
Tune out the noise. Like, you do not need to scroll Instagram all day or to pull your family and your friends. You do not need to ask their opinion on everything that you're doing, because
Yeah.
all it does is create static and
Hmm.
frustration.
Yeah. And really, all they're doing is adding their own insecurities about what they would do in that situation. So it really doesn't help you at all.
No, no, you're so right about that. It's all a projection
Hmm.
of, I did this once and this happened, and so I'm going to project that experience onto your situation. Or I'm afraid of this for you, or I'm afraid of this for myself, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah. That's it's all really good. Where were you when I was 20?
Struggle, mired in self-doubt.
I-
I was like 8 years old trying to
yeah.
figure out what I was going to do with my entire life and
You were
how I could
selling your
avoid
plastic
ruining it.
jewelry.
Yeah.
So funny. But I think a lot of people can benefit from that type of coaching, because I think if given the opportunity, a lot of people would choose something else. Like they've maybe gotten into a stale kind of job situation, or just not something that's just not fulfilling, or something's just not right. I personally know many people who just go along with life, and this must be all there is, or I have a desire in my heart to do something, but I can't really see how I get there or anything like that. So I think it's important to really evaluate those things, and if you have a burning desire to do something, or if you need to get unstuck, it's certainly helpful to find a coach like yourself.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And obviously I'm a coach. I 1,000% agree. But I came to self-help 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, because I was grappling with a big life decision and I couldn't figure out what to do. And it actually wasn't about career at all, but I absolutely resonate with everything you just said. Like, one of the questions I asked myself a lot was, is this as good as it gets?
Hmm.
Right? Like, I've got the job, like I'm happy enough, I'm healthy. Is this it? That kind of existential angst
Yep.
that a lot of people feel. And of course they oftentimes, I think, especially now with social media and the pressure, almost it feels like, to start your own business.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know if you've noticed that, but
Yes. Yeah.
it
Recently. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, it really seemed, and of course, as someone who's done this, who has left full-time work to work for myself, I've done it a couple times, but it's painted as the solution to all of your life purpose quandaries, right? All you
Hmm.
have to do is get out from under the man,
Yeah.
then you will be happy forever.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things I encourage my clients to do is to bloom where they're planted first, because I know that the grass is not greener
Hmm.
on the other side after you make the leap in job. There's still crap.
Hmm.
There's still a bunch of crap. But at any rate, so that was a tangent. I came to life coaching in the summer of 2024 because I was grappling with this life decision. And everyone just kept saying, well, trust your gut. Because at this point in time, I was asking anyone and everyone for advice. What should I do? I don't know what to do. I'm confused. And they were like, well, just trust your intuition. And I didn't even know what that meant. Do you have a strong sense of intuition?
I do. And I'll tell you, to be perfectly honest, I went through a really difficult personal time, a divorce. And at that point, I went through a time where I really doubted myself after that. A lot of self-doubt. And I think I can pinpoint that to why I kind of feel stuck now at certain spots more than I did before. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
It kind of just gave you evidence for,
Yes.
like,
Mhm.
hey, maybe your decisions weren't the best in the past, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah. Um, that's a scary place to be.
Hmm.
The not being able to trust yourself. And that was where I was in the summer of 2014. And maybe it was 2013. At any rate, I Googled. I was like, how to trust your intuition. Because I had no idea. And everyone kept telling me to do it. And the very first thing that popped up was an article in Oprah magazine by this woman named Martha Beck. And I was like, I don't know who this is, but I'm going to click into this article. And I read it, and she had an exercise in there about how, the physical sensation of a yes or a no for
Hmm.
you. And I was like, well, this sounds like crap, but I'll do the exercise. And I did the exercise, and I felt exactly what she said I would feel physically. And I was like, okay, I don't know who this lady is, but I need to read all of her stuff. And she was Oprah's life coach.
Hmm.
So started reading Martha Beck's work. And at the time, in the early 2000s, she was known as America's best known life coach. So if you think about a lot of the proliferation of coaching and the way it's presented today, I think a lot of it can be attributed to Martha. But I just started down that road with her because I was so lost. And I was like, there's something that I'm missing. And this woman seems to know what it is. Like the way she's talking about it, it speaks to me. There's something real and there's something true here.
Hmm.
And that's the road I've been on ever since.
Yeah. And I can say sometimes if I am in the middle of a decision or trying to make a decision, there are times when it's crippling for me. And it doesn't even have to be a huge decision. Sometimes it's where I'm going to eat or where we're going to go do something. I can even feel that now. It's a crippling degree. Like, which should I do? What should I do? I don't know. What do I pick? So, yeah.
I think yeah, there's so much. It seems like a mental problem,
Hmm.
right? It seems like a language problem, a pro-con logical problem that we need to solve with language. And where I have landed with this now is that so many of our problems that we tried to solve with language and with logic are really just feeling problems. And that's where we need to go to try to solve them. And, even for instance, with a decision like whatever the decision might be, where to eat, it's, I would notice if you want a little coaching tip to
Yeah.
play with,
Yeah.
I would just notice how you feel. How does it feel physically as a sensation in your body? And just start to note. And I would actually recommend starting really small, not even going down the road of trying to base your decisions on that. I wouldn't change your decision making process at all to start. I would just start to notice, hey, when do I feel awful? And what does that specifically feel like? For me, it feels like tension in my throat. Like it feels like hands are grasping around like my trachea or
Hmm.
whatever. And then notice the other decisions that feel easier, that feel lighter, the things you want to move toward, and note what they physically feel like.
Yeah.
If someone asks you like, hey, do you want a donut? Like, or I don't know, whatever the
I don't
case
know.
is. If it's an easy yes, kind of notice what that feels like. Because the body is a truth teller and
Hmm.
your mind can lie to you, but your body doesn't.
That's a really good point. That's very true. And it's been true for me too. Yeah, you can tell when you're like tense or if you feel light. And yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you help people just in general, but you also help companies. In what way would a company need coaching?
I think about what I do, the work that I do as a consultant for companies is really my people and companies who want to do things differently, right? Who are looking around at their workforce and thinking there has to be a better way to do this. This kind of old school, everyone's miserable kind of vibe. There
Hmm.
has to be a different way to do this. There has to be a better way to resolve conflict. There has to be a better way to communicate. There has to be a better way that I can be a leader. And I believe that organizational change starts at the top. So if
Hmm.
the leaders are interested in becoming more astute, more compassionate, more skillful leaders, that's where like one-on-one coaching can come into play. And then also some of the work that I'm doing, I'm the chief transformation officer for a bioplastics company in Indiana. And what I'm doing with them is just building out an organization-wide coaching model that's going to serve like all layers of the organization, that's also kind of infusing the culture and the way we do things with very clear purpose and very clear values and standards. So I kind of describe it as I get to bring all my somewhat mystical life coaching philosophies and marry that with a corporate organizational structure and needs.
Do you find that I would think within the last 4 years or so, there have been great change in the corporate environment with COVID and, being away from the office. Communication changed for a lot of people. Working with peers might have been harder for some, easier for others, dependent on all of that. Have you found that was a real catalyst for companies needing coaching around that time?
I think there's a lot more openness to it
Hmm.
for sure. And I do think that COVID was a catalyst for wanting to do things differently or seeing that, like, hey, now we have an opportunity to do them differently. So we might as well try. But here's what I don't think is different. I think for the vast majority of people, especially in a corporate setting or a workplace setting, they don't know how to manage themselves, especially emotionally. And so that makes it really difficult to go out and have challenging conversations with your team. Because if you come into a conversation frustrated and kind of like, I need to make my team perform, that's not a terribly effective energy from which to lead.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And I don't think that that has really changed. I think people understand the need for it, but I don't think that a lot of people are really coming at it from the point of, hey, if I learn to manage myself emotionally, I can lead my team and truly lead them, not just manage them, truly lead and cultivate a high performing team.
Yeah, and that's really what makes a team successful is leadership, true leadership, not, the micromanaging part of, handling somebody, but it's truly inspiring the people who work for you to do better for themselves and, elevate their work and, be happy that they're doing so well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One of the things when I was in my last corporate role, when I was managing, and I hadn't started coach training at that point, I wasn't a coach. I was just using what I'd learned myself in the self help world and as a client of coaches and the work that I'd done myself. And people would come to me, my team would come to me, and they'd been like workplace conflict or conversations they were afraid to have, like,
Hmm.
hey, how do I say this to so and so, and those kinds of things that can kind of keep you up at night
Yes.
when you're in that mode. And they'd be really focused on like what on the other person, and what should I say, what language should I use. And that's a thing I was asked frequently, tell me what to say.
Oh, yeah.
And we would never do that because it's almost useless. It's almost useless for me to tell you what to say, because if you don't believe it, if you don't feel solid in it,
Hmm.
then you're not going to communicate it in a way that your energy backs up. So I would always just start with like, okay, well, how are you feeling? What do you think about this situation? Tell me what you're thinking about it. Tell me what you're afraid of. Tell me what's bothering you so much. And as you start to tease out those things, you start to find what works out to be like the root cause of whatever the fear or the frustration is. And then they're able to figure out what they want to say on their own. And that has been, I found, the most effective way to communicate properly is to understand yourself deeply first and then go communicate.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when you're working with peers or on a team. There are certainly times where you just want to be like, okay, how do I say this to a manager? How do I get it across to them in their language? Because they're clearly not hearing me. But yeah, it's basically finding it within yourself. Okay, how am I feeling about it? And how, I can only change me, right? I can only
Yes.
say what I'm feeling. I have no idea what they're feeling or what they're thinking. I can only worry about myself. So, yeah.
And be really clear about what you actually want to communicate.
Mhm.
Because sometimes we come in with these shields of like frustration and anger and like really pushing against the person.
Mhm.
And it's just not an effective place to start. Because if you go in with that energy, it doesn't matter what you say, all they will feel is your energy.
Mhm.
All they will feel is your energy.
Oh yeah, of course. Do you do any work with, say you have two coworkers who are almost similar? Like I feel like those are the kinds of people who tend to butt heads the most. And how do you get them to maybe think of things in another way, or like how would you even approach that? Because sometimes it's difficult.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So when I was, let me think back to my last role, and because there was definitely some
No,
stuff like
yeah,
that
there always is.
happened. There always is. And I think it really just comes down to understanding why it bothers you so much.
Mm,
Truly, why is it bothering you so much? Why is this such a problem? Because I noticed for myself that I kind of like, and it wasn't Pollyanna. I just wasn't troubled by this kind of infighting,
mhm.
kind of all the crap that comes along sometimes in an office setting.
Yeah.
And I was able to see the dynamic. I could be in the same situation, but I was not bothered. And that tells me it's something about the thoughts you're having about this situation and not about the situation itself. And so that's where I would always start, right? Like,
Mhm.
even if it's two people who are kind of butting heads, it's like, why is this such a problem? Why is it bothering you so much? What are you afraid of? And there are answers there. They're different for everyone, but your answers are there.
Yeah. I'm taking copious notes.
Well, it's funny because, I often in coaching sessions, my clients want me to tell them what to do
I
or what to
imagine
say.
so. Like, tell me how to do this. Just tell me what the answer
I
is.
know. I know. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work
Yeah.
because the way I do things is not the way it's going to work for you,
Mhm.
right? It's not your style. I actually had a client recently who was trying really hard to adopt a style
Mhm.
of being a communication style that was not working for them, and they were just trying so hard to like do it this way. And the more they tried, the more uncomfortable they got. And like it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Mhm.
right? Of like,
Right.
I'm afraid I'm going to do badly and I'm going to try really hard and I'm going to do badly. And it just kind of like loops around and around in a downward spiral. And when we finished the session, they finally came away and they were like, I need to just be myself. Like, the way to stop this from getting worse is to stop trying to be someone that I'm not, even in the way that I'm communicating. And that's true. I have a pretty dry sense of humor and I communicate that way
Yeah, I do
in the
too.
office. And, it doesn't work with everyone. It doesn't
Mhm.
work for everyone, but I could never adopt a persona or a style that was like crazy gregarious or anything like that. It would come across as inauthentic
Mhm.
because it is. And, that's what I always try to remind my clients when they ask me for my words. They're not, those are mine. Like, you've got your own. You have your own perfect way of communicating this.
That is so perfect because I will say, and I know that some are listening on my team specifically, I am the even keeled listener. I've always had the gift of listening for some reason. I give great advice to other people. don't really follow it myself, but I have in my office a complaint chair, and people just come in and sit down and like share their share their difficulties. So I've become that even keeled, person that people come to. So
It's a gift. It's a gift because people have their own answers.
hmm
They do. They really do. They just need to be encouraged to trust them,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And to have a place where they can actually experiment with trusting their own answers
yeah.
and realizing, oh, hey, that was fine. My instincts were right. I pulled that one off just fine. That actually makes me want to ask, though, are you familiar with human design?
A little bit. So you have
Okay.
to explain it a little bit.
Oh my gosh. Well, I am not a human design expert in any way. I know enough to be dangerous, but there is, oh gosh, how would I even describe it? It's kind of like astrology on steroids,
Okay.
is how I explain human design. And there are, based on the date, time, location of your birth, you can get a free chart online. But there are 62 or 64, they're called gates.
hmm
And they're essentially gifts that we each have in varying combinations. And one of them is basically the gift of listening.
Hmm.
And I'm curious if you have it. I have it. It's one of mine. It's actually my communication style
Oh, wow. I'll have
is
to find
is
out.
listening. Yeah.
I've always been that person who listens to other people. And it's so funny because I even say it to myself, I'm like, man, I give the greatest advice, but I don't listen to myself. I don't give it to me.
That makes me think of Alice in Wonderland
Yeah.
when she says, I give myself very good advice, but I
hmm
very seldom follow it.
Yep. That I know. I love that line actually because I'm like, oh, yeah, that seems familiar.
That was always familiar to me too.
hmm
Because the advice, well, okay, here's the thing. Good advice is always conservative advice,
Yes.
right?
hmm
On paper, what looks like good advice always is conservative.
hmm
But when I think about truly the best advice I've ever gotten, um, 2013, so going back in time to that summer, I was preparing to buy my first house and interest rates were 4% and
Mm.
they kept going up. I was like, oh my God, the rates are so high and everything is so expensive and the rates are so
Mm.
high and freaking out. I was like 20, 25.
Mhm.
And I went out to happy hour with a couple. I think they were in their 40s.
Mhm.
They bought their first house during the 80s. So
Oh,
however old that
yeah.
makes them, I don't know. But we were talking about my house purchase, and I was telling them that the market was going up and rates were going up, and oh my God, da da da, what if I lose my job? What if I can't afford it? I should probably just buy the cheapest possible house I can find and cross my fingers that it doesn't fall down. And the man said to me, best advice I've ever gotten. Well, first he said, you need to calm down about interest rates because when my wife and I bought our first house, the rates were 10%.
Mm.
So you need to have some historical perspective here. A 4% is practically zero.
Yeah.
So get a grip, girl, first of all. But then he said that when they bought their first house, they were given some advice that he was now passing on to me. And he said, we were told to stretch ourselves when we were buying our first house, buy a little bit more than you think you can afford, a little bit more than seems responsible,
Mhm.
because you are going to keep growing. You are going to keep advancing in your career. You're going to keep getting better. And if you buy the cheapest possible thing, if you only buy what you think you can afford at this moment, in a couple of years, you're going to wish you bought a bigger house. And it wasn't like go crazy, it
Right.
wasn't like max out your credit, but that advice to stretch just a little bit, just do a little bit more than you feel comfortable doing. That advice changed my life. And I didn't apply it right away,
Mhm.
but when I did start to apply it, that is when things started to change for me.
I love that. And actually, that can be helpful for someone who's really in a place where maybe they're not comfortable making a huge leap of faith right at the start. That small stretch can help them get to that. And I love
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always talk about, hey, we're not starting in this work by flinging ourselves off a cliff.
Yeah.
That is not step
No.
one. Step one is always stepping off a curb,
Hmm.
right? You're just stepping off a curb. You're not jumping off a cliff.
Yeah.
And those are those little stretches. It's putting yourself out there. It's doing the thing that feels uncomfortable, but not like you're going to die. Like
Right.
you're afraid, but you don't think you're going to die if you do it.
Yeah.
That's where you start.
Yeah. And for me, that works because in work and, with podcasting and things like that, I feel like putting myself out there, that's something I can do in little bits and like to get there, to stretch it out and be uncomfortable a little bit. It helps me learn. It helps me get better. Yeah, I very much agree with that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you find you just add little things to your storytelling arsenal, right?
Hmm.
More things that make up the story of you. Like when I got divorced and I was around the time I found the Uno card, I decided to take ballroom dancing lessons. And I've never been a dancer or an athlete,
Hmm.
I've never been a physical person. I've
Yeah.
always been like a brain based kind of person.
Hmm.
So the idea of like eyes on me physically was always like, ooh, no, we're going to
Yeah.
pass on that. But I decided to spend way too much money on ballroom dancing lessons because they're also incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And the amount of money that I dropped on that, I'm like, what were you thinking? But I was thinking I wanted to do something different and got into lessons, and that was fun. And then there was like a studio showcase, and my teacher was like, well, you're going to do it, right? And I was like, why would I? Why? Like, just for the purpose of like stressing myself out? Like, there's no monetary incentive to doing this. There's no like prize. It's just for the doing of it.
Hmm.
And I ended up doing it. I ended up doing it and dancing what was it? Oh my gosh, what was that dance? A rumba.
Oh,
Dance,
yeah.
dancing a rumba. And after that I didn't continue ballroom dancing, but that's another, it was a huge step outside of my comfort zone. It was an exploration.
Hmm.
I think anytime you're post divorce or post any big kind of transition, there's a period of exploration where you're just doing random stuff and none of it has to fit together. None of it has to be your money maker. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be your life's purpose. It's just something that you did during that period of time when you were exploring.
Yeah, that's so important. Not everything, right, like you said, has to put you on a trajectory of some sort. It can just be personal exploration. Like, that sounds kind of neat. Maybe I'll try it. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. 100%.
Yeah.
So that means you need to go find an improv class.
You know what? The answer is not no. Okay.
Okay.
So here's what happened in my brain in that split second. Because I think when you start to see this happen, and I'm gonna say this for everyone so they can start to realize when it happens for them.
Okay.
The first place my brain went was there's no place around here. I live in a small town. But I was like, well, there's no place around here. There's nowhere. Can't do it. Immediately. And
Hmm.
then my brain then went to, oh, but you could start one. That was the second place my brain went
Uh-huh.
because I've trained myself for a long time that these perceived external obstacles are not. They're not.
Right.
I could start an improv club today if I wanted to, right? I don't know
Hmm.
how, but I know it's possible. I bet I could find one other person in this town who
I'm
wants to
sure
do
you
improv.
could.
But I think that's also the practice
Hmm.
of getting ready for a leap of faith or any big change is if someone suggests something and you find yourself always pushing back against it immediately, just notice that.
Yeah.
Notice how much you default to no.
I sometimes do that. I try not to because I know that I'm like, oh, I could do that. I don't know what it is inside me that's like keeping me from saying yes. But yeah, I've had those moments where I'm just like, no, no, no. But I'm like, oh, come on. You can do this.
Yeah, and I think it's knowing the difference between, like, is it a real no or is it a fearful no?
Right. Yeah.
'Cause I
Honestly, podcasting for me was it puts the fear in me like nobody's business. I will tell you that right now.
really?
Yes, petrified of interviewing you today and talking with you. Like, yeah, seriously. But it puts me in that mindset of I can do this. I know how to do this. It's going to be okay. She is a human being. She has a story she's going to share. It's going to be great. And it has been.
Yes, I've been having so much fun. I didn't
Yeah.
pick up on that at all. You're so
Yeah.
natural. You're
Yeah,
so
well,
natural.
I
So
I suppress
what's behind the fear?
failure of like sounding like an idiot, not sounding prepared, all these bad things like that
Uh-huh.
makes me feel like you're not good enough and why are you doing this? You should be sitting around crocheting cuz you're old now. Why are you doing this in this space? It's for the young people.
I mean, I think the young people have moved on to TikTok, but
They have, and I will not do that.
I will not do it either. I tried to, and
I
I was
love
like, I
TikTok,
can't.
but no, I won't participate.
I just can't. I
No.
can't. I just think it's so interesting because to me, this is an absolutely failure-free endeavor. Like, how could you possibly fail at this?
Yeah. Oh,
What does that
well,
even mean?
my brain thinks I can.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it. I understand like
Mhm.
the emotional experience. Like, oh my god, I don't want to feel the whatever it is.
Yeah.
Embarrassment, humiliation. That was always what I you know I did. I had a podcast during COVID with a friend,
Mhm.
and I think everyone had a podcast during COVID.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't expect anyone to listen to it. So that was kind of where I started with this format. But when I published my first novel, I realized that someone one day, if anyone read my novels, if they achieved any degree of success whatsoever, one day someone would go on there to Amazon and write a 1-star review just trashing my work. And my worst nightmare was that like someone I knew in real life would go read those reviews and be like,
Mm.
yeah, she does suck. She is awful at this. This was a terrible book. Who does she think she is? And that I had to make peace with that happening. I was like, yeah, someday someone is going to say my books suck, and they're going to say it publicly. And if I want to do this, I have to be willing to experience that, period. And that willingness has carried me a long way. And that's not to say that I go read negative reviews because I don't like I'm not going to abuse myself that
Yeah.
way. But I am willing now. I no longer hide my fiction. I've hid my fiction. Like one day when I was at my last company, we had a lending library in the
Mhm.
kitchen, and someone had put my first novel on the shelf, and I just wanted to
Oh
die.
my
I was
gosh.
like, oh my God, they know. But you know what? I'm still here. They might think it's garbage, and that's okay. But yeah, the willingness to experience humiliation in particular.
Mhm.
Humiliation was the trickiest emotion for me.
That's a hard one to overcome. And honestly, I think improv helped me in that regard. It's definitely a life skill that helps you get out of that mindset and just know that you're going to be okay and the world isn't going to end. It's just it is no, it's fun and you're going to be okay and you're going to be supported.
And I believe that's true. When
Mhm.
you talk about being supported, I assume by like the people that you're
Yes.
performing with.
Yep.
I think broadly about, the universe as a benevolent, supportive supportive place. Like that's kind of my spiritual, philosophical belief. And the other thing too that helps me, and it reminds me of you listen to a lot of people come into your office and tell you a lot of things. And I listen to a lot of people tell me a lot of things
Mm-hmm.
about what they're going through. And it's all the same. We all have the same hangups, the same fears, the same anxieties, all of it. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Broken Open. It's a book
No.
by Elizabeth Lesser. Highly recommend. I found it after my divorce. And at one point, she talks about how we are all clowns riding around in clown cars, pretending that we know what we're doing and that we've got it figured out. But it's true. We're all just kind of bopping along,
Mm-hmm.
clowning around, trying to figure this out. And I shared this with, he's a good friend now, but he has a PhD in engineering and works in neuroscience, brilliant guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared this with him, this clown thing. And he was like, oh, gosh, it's such a relief because I felt that way for so long. And you meet these really accomplished, really brilliant people, and they have all the same insecurities that we do,
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. That's awesome. Well, Jessica, you've made me feel better today.
Well, I've had a blast. Oh my gosh, has it been an hour?
It
Wow, it has
has,
been.
hasn't it? See,
Okay.
it just happened like magic.
Yes. Well, this is the magic of just like responding to what's in front of you,
It
right?
is, right? And
Yeah.
listening and, yep, just taking it all in. So I have very much enjoyed our discussion today. I hope you have too. It's been very helpful for me. I'm taking notes.
Oh my gosh, are you really?
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I have had a blast. It's just been a pleasure. And I love this idea of, what's in your junk drawer and pulling out these things that make you think a little more deeply about the experience of being alive. I
Yeah, and
love
I
that.
know
So thank
when we
you.
first talked, you said you don't necessarily have a junk drawer, but your drawer is called something else. What is it called?
Oh,
Maybe
yes, yes,
drawer?
yes. It's called the maybe drawer.
Yeah.
And it's based on the idea that, like, hey, do we have a pair of scissors? And the answer is always, I don't know, maybe.
That's
You
great.
go look in the maybe drawer for all the things you may or may not have.
That's great. That's a good way of looking at it. That's how our house runs, honestly. Well, I want you to take a few minutes and just kind of tell people where they can find you. I know there are going to be some people who probably will contact you for some personal assistance.
Sure,
But yeah, what are you
sure.
working on? What's going on with you?
So let's see. Right now, my next creative project is going to be a self help book that will be out this fall or winter, still TBD. It is called This Is So Much Worse Than I Expected. And you can find that. It's actually for pre order on Amazon. So I don't know why I said it might be out this fall. It's October 17th. I think I've
Awesome.
been saying that for so long. It'll be out later. It's going to be out October 17th. And it's available for pre order on Amazon.
Oh,
So
great.
it's called This Is So Much Worse Than I Expected. And people can also find me, my blog, my podcast, and coaching with me at jessicaell.com.
Okay.
And so if you want to get into coaching, I do 4-month one-on-one coaching, and that's called my Jump program. So for people who are looking to either prepare to make a leap of faith, actually do it, or in the post leap period,
Mm-hmm.
when they realize like, oh my God, this is so much worse than I expected, for those people too.
Okay.
So that's at jessicaell.com. And then my one social media place is Instagram. So
Okay.
I am there at the Jessica L.
Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I learned a lot and it gives me hope, actually. It's given me some things to think about in my life. So I really, really appreciate you talking with me today.
It was my pleasure, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to email me, you can find me at mybigfatjunkdrawer@gmail.com. Drop me a line. Let's chat about what's in your junk drawer, and we'll see you next time. Bye.